Hey, Psych students, welcome to Chapter 10, Personality. This is my second favorite chapter. What is my first? My first is Variations of Mental Health. That goes into all of the psychological disorders. But the reason that this one is my personal fave, or second personal fave, is because this is the Freudian chapter. And if you know me, you know I love some Sigmund Freud. All right, so we are going to jump right in. I've got some study hall and crash courses here for you. So the first link you can click on is this study hall. Do you really know your personality? And then followed by the Rorschach and Freudians, and then measuring personality. There's a couple more crash courses within this presentation, and I wanted to put them somewhere very specific where I'm going to be talking about those concepts. So let's jump right in. All right, so here are the things that I'm going to discuss in this chapter. We're going to uncover the psychodynamic approach, the humanistic approach, trait, social cognitive, biological approach, and then ending with personality assessment. All right, so what is personality? So if we're just going to textbook define that, personality is a pattern of enduring. Now remember, enduring is lasting, right? Enduring distinctive thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that characterize the way an individual adapts to the world. Now, personality isn't exactly fixed, so your personality does evolve over time. So it's not like once you are born with this personality, it just stays that way. No, it does evolve and it is enduring over time. We will kind of talk about temperament. Not yet, though. All right, so the psychodynamic perspective. So this is the theoretical view emphasizing that personality is primarily unconscious and behavior is only a surface characteristic. There's our good boy Freud. And so he came out of the psychoanalytic approach. So he is the father of psychoanalysis. Let me go back to where I was at. All right. Now, psychodynamic came out of Freud's psychoanalytic approach. So psychodynamic still carries some of the same perspectives as psychoanalysis, and that is when we look at that approach or that perspective, it's unconscious. So these are things that are not in your awareness and it's motivated by fear. So that's what we're looking at in here. There are symbolic meanings that underlie your behaviors. So it's not a conscious thing that we are thinking, it's more of what is going on underneath. Early childhood experiences sculpt the individual's personality. And this all started with Freud's perspective. So, really, it's deeply rooted in childhood experiences, according to Freud. All right, so let's talk about Freud and psychoanalysis since he is the father of that theory. So Freud said, basically everything revolves around sex, right? So sex drive, main determinant of personality development. According to him, all of your actions and thoughts and everything surround sex drive. And then there's also this term that Freud was very comfortable with and familiar with was hysteria. Physical symptoms without physical cause. Many women that came to see Freud, he would basically, diagnose them and say, oh, you're suffering with hysteria. Interesting, so many interesting stories. Psychological cause are those unconscious conflicts that Freud talks about. Well, there's a problem with you because you have this underlying unconscious conflict that you cannot deal with, that you're not dealing with. So everything with Freud had to do with unconscious, like wishes and desires that really you couldn't act out, you couldn't talk about. So a lot of people you're going to see later down the road, they're like, Freud, what's up with you, dude? Like, I don't get you. Like, huh? But even though he never had like a scientific theory like all the others, They kept him around because a lot of what he said was really, excuse me, really accurate. All right, so also there's this idea of repression of painful experiences and their conversion into physical symptoms. So I'm going to jump more into a lot of these like defense mechanisms soon. All right, so if you want to kind of learn about his structure, click on this picture and it will discuss his structure in more detail. All right, so what we're going to talk about and what talks about in the video too are his three components of personality structure, and that's the id, ego, and superego. I'm going to try to help you remember these concepts. So the id, those are instincts and the reservoir of sexual energy. So the id is called the pleasure principle, and the id is like buried deep down below, right? That's like the things that I want what I want, and it doesn't matter. I'm going to get them because I want it. So it's like the selfish part, right? It's buried deep down. Then we have the ego. Okay, the ego is like that middleman that deals with the demands of reality, right? And they kind of relate to the reality principle. And then we have the super ego. That's like that moral center. That's the moral branch of personality, which is called the conscience. Oops, let me go back to that. All right, so if you can think about it like this, the id is like on the left side of your shoulder, right? It's like, just do it, just do it. It's okay. It's okay. You're going to get away with it. I don't even care if I do. And then the right side is the super ego, right? That's like the moral center saying like, don't do it. It's not right. Please don't do it. You're better than that, whatever. And the ego is that mediator, kind of talking to both sides, like, all right, come on, guys, let's just be friends. Let's work it out, you know? So think about it like id is that like instinctual, like gonna do it. And then the super ego is that moral, like super. If you can like think about it like that. I always like to like have things to where I'm like, all right, how can I remember this? So that's kind of, what I do. So id is pleasure principle, ego is reality principle, and then super ego is your moral. That's your conscience. All right. So I'm sure many of you've seen the Freudian iceberg. Now it looks different, different textbooks. It looks blue, white, whatever. In this textbook, it is green and white. So as you see, the very tip of the iceberg, right? The very tip of that is right under is where the ego lies. That's the mediator, the little middleman. The super ego is just off to the side. It's down there, it's below, it's unconscious, and the id is buried even deeper. Those are the things like if you have suffered with trauma or just great loss where your brain like protects you from just revealing that, it's just buried deep down. And those are those repressed thoughts. So they're not in that conscious awareness. So you can look at the personality structure in a few different ways. And so I just wanted to like throw that out there. All right, here's a really good lecture that I have viewed. So if you click on this link, this is a Yale University lecture on Freud. Very interesting. And I always like throwing out different lectures, especially when it comes to Freud. I've done some, or I've put lectures in before of like Harvard, MIT, and I wanted to do this one on Yale because I thought it was a really interesting lecture regarding Freud and his work. So if you're really into understanding Freud and who he was, and you're going into this field and you want to really understand personality, this is a really good lecture. All right. So this was his daughter. This was Anna Freud. And she, had these concepts of defense mechanisms, just like Freud. She kind of carried on her dad's work. So defense mechanisms are the conflict between the id, the ego, and the superego. And what's the resulting factor? Anxiety. So if you click on this picture, it's going to bring you to another video related to Anna Freud and her work. All right, so Anna Freud was really wanting to dive deeper into her dad's work and, looking at reducing anxiety by unconsciously distorting reality. So she extended on her father's work, and she knew that it wasn't really necessarily a bad thing. So it's not necessarily unhealthy sometimes to have these defense mechanisms. And so you'll see, just more about her work. So she also studied defense mechanisms, but focused on how the ego uses them to manage anxiety and conflict, particularly in childhood development. So she strayed a little bit away from her dad's work, more looking at it like, okay, how does this actually work for you, instead of it all being like bad and women are just hysterical. And by the way, Freud loved his kid. It is said that, Freud was a woman hater, misogynist, all the bad things, right? But you cannot take away his brilliance. All right, so I'm going to go over these defense mechanisms. Oops, I keep doing that. All right, so the first one is denial. Denial is a disbelief, or you disbelieve in that, what is happening is happening. So disbelieve present reality. Displacement, you're going to notice that displacement and projection kind of look similar, but they're not. They're two different concepts. But displacement is shift feelings to new target. I'm going to give examples on the next page. Sublimation is transform vile to valuable. So we're going to transfer that to to good. Projection is attribute own faults to others. So you probably heard of that, that saying, or you hear that like, stop projecting on me. Stop projecting your stuff onto me. That's Freudian. And then reaction formation, experience opposite of actual desires. And then repression is push unacceptable impulses out of awareness. So when our brain does not want to deal with something, trauma, whatever it is, or just, your brain protects you. It will push it out of your conscious awareness. Now, how can you make that conscious? There are many ways. Therapy is one, and hypnosis is another, but again, you have to be subjective to hypnosis. All right, so I threw in some examples here. So denial, so you deny reality. Example, loved one being gone, a substance use problem, blaming others. So if you're in denial of something, maybe someone, passed away, or a breakup happened, and you're like, this is just not true. This is not happening. This is not reality. Or, example, substance abuse problem, right? You have a problem, people around you, they know there's the problem, and you're like, I don't have a problem. Everything's fine, right? That's denial. We're in denial. Displacement, your boss yells at you at work, right? So you go to work and they're having a bad day. They take it out on you. So what do? Because you're frustrated, you're already like amped up. So you come home and then you take it out on your partner or your loved one or someone. So you're displacing that anger that someone put on you onto someone else. Sublimation, someone with anger issues may channel their energy playing a sport. That's where it can be like a good thing. So you might have anger issues. Maybe you're going to counseling for anger, right? And so your therapist is working with you on how to channel your anger. So it might be through boxing, through going to those places where you break dishes everywhere, going to axe throwing, just getting out that aggression in a more healthy way. Projection, most basic, you're angry with yourself, so you take it out on others. So that's the difference between the projection and the displacement. So displacement is someone else, right, is doing something to you, then you come home and take it out on someone. Projection is, this is internal. So you're angry with yourself, so you then take it out on someone else. So you're projecting whatever's going on with you onto someone. So that's the difference between the two. If you just vaguely look at it, you might be like, wait, what's the difference? That's the difference. Reaction formation example, someone who is secretly attracted to another person acts overly aggressive or hostile towards them, right? So they like you. So what are they going to do? They're going to be mean to you. I don't like you. They're going to do something because they don't want to show you like how they really feel. All right. And then repression, for those are those Freudian slips. Have you ever heard of Freudian slip? Like you say one thing, but you mean your mother? Oh, I mean another. That's a Freudian slip. There are so many. So someone might accidentally call their partner by an ex's name. Uh-oh. Those are those things that are like deep down. So you don't realize like something is gonna like come out. It just happens. All right, now we're going to go over Freud's psychosexual stages. So you can click on this link right here, and this is Freud's psychosexual stages of development explained. Although I'm going to explain it to you. This is just a nice video that explains it. All right, so according to Freud, there are psychosexual stages. There are 5 of them. All right, the first one is the oral stage, and that is from 0 to 18 months. Infant's pleasure centers on the mouth, right? Baby, everything is going in the mouth. That's why parents are like always picking up stuff off the ground because they can choke on them, right? That's just normal. So, but according to Freud, it's the oral stage. Again, everything with Freud is sexual. Okay, so infant's pleasure centers on the mouth. Everything goes in there. Now you got to remember, with every theorist, they have a resolution if everything goes well, and then a conflict. So we're going to see later what the oral conflict is. All right, then we have the anal stage. That's from 18 to 36 months, right? So a year and a half to 3 years old, about there. Child's pleasure involves eliminative functions. So bowel. This is during the potty training days. Then we have what's called the phallic stage. That's Freud's very interesting stage. And he did a study called it's the little Hans study. If you're a little bit older and you took ACE psychology, you definitely studied this. And this is where he studied a little boy named Hans who had a bit of an issue. So it's such a cool and interesting study. I used to teach the study, but if you take personality, if you really like this chapter, I highly encourage you to take personality as a semester class because you'll learn about the little Hans study. Anyway, so the phallic stage is 3 to 6 years old. This is the child's pleasure focuses on the genitals. And if you click on this link right here, this is going to explain the Oedipus complex. The Oedipus complex. So you've got the Oedipus complex and the Electra complex. Really, we just focus on the Oedipus, or Freud did. So the Oedipus complex is, if you've ever heard of this, it's when a boy wants to get rid of his father because he has these sexual urges for his mother and he wants to be with mom. So he wants to get rid of dad. So this is a really short video about it. It's actually really good. So I highly suggest just click on it and give it a listen. And you're like, oh my God, that's so gross. Like, I don't want to have sex with my mom or my dad. Like, I don't want to be with them. I'm not attracted to them. That's so weird. That's where Freud is like cuckoo cuckoo, right? Like, hello, Hot Mess Express. But when you think about it in the his approach, you're like, dude, what? That's where the psychodynamics came. And they were like, all right, let's kind of clean this up and talk about what it really is. And usually I tell a really elaborate, in my in-person classes, I will talk about this more in depth, but I'm not going to do it here. But anyway, so if you want to learn about the Oedipus complex, you can look at some more links, but this is just a short explanation. All right, within this and within that study, the Hans study, there is this term castration anxiety, and that is the fear of losing or the damage to the penis for incestuous desires toward the mother and wanting to be rid of the father. And that was discussed in the little Hans study. So, and they called it the Whittler. His penis was called the Whittler. And basically, mom said, you can't get into bed with me anymore. Like, little boys sometimes when they're little, they crawl into bed with mom. They're comforting, right? And she basically said, hey, if you don't, you got to stay out of my room, because if you don't, guess what's going to happen? Your Whittler is going to get cut off. It's like, wow, talk about trauma. All right, so yeah, if you want to learn more about Freud and all his work, take Personality. Such an amazing class. All right. And then we have what's called penis envy. Freud came up with that. You see what I'm saying? Everything is related to sex with this dude. And we're going to learn like the opposite of that old penis envy. But basically, he was like, ladies, girls, everybody, you are jealous because you do not have a penis. So we're like, wait, what? Yeah, so you can learn more about that. All right, now we are into the latency stage. Now, in the latency and genital stage, we're really not going to see anything else explained or any like conflict. So the latency, I call it the dormant stage. That's 6 years to puberty. And that's basically that timeout. Nothing is going on. We're going to school, we're learning, we're educating. There's no desires, there's none of that stuff. After puberty, it happens. But anyway, so interest in sexuality is repressed, right? It's just kind of pushed down because it's like, okay, I can't be feeling this, even though you probably do. And you're like, I can't do this because I got to stay laser focused on school and all that stuff. So it's just lying dormant. Then we have the last stage in Freud's psychosexual stages of development, which is called the genital stage. And that's adolescence all the way into adulthood. And that's when there is a sexual reawakening. Source of sexual pleasure is now someone else, right? We're not now, oops, let me go back. We're no longer just like us. Now it's like someone else is involved. All right, fixation, that's another Freudian term, remain locked in particular developmental stage. So, for example, anal retentive. If you've ever heard of like anal retentive, like, why are you so anal? Like, why are you being so, that is because you become fixated, according to Freud. And if you didn't work out your stuff in childhood, then it carries over into your adulthood. All right, so I put these in here to kind of show you, and I think I have, oh no, never mind. I do have it, another couple things explained. I must have not made it into the lecture though. All right, so I'll add that into the still PowerPoint. All right, so you've got the oral, anal, and phallic stage, and that's where we're going to have those defense mechanisms. So you can kind of pause this and look. I don't want to read all of them to you, but it'll give you like, okay, here's the stage. This is the adult extension. What happens if you don't kind of get through that stage? If maybe you had very stringent or very strict parents, they will, like, don't do this, don't do that, or whatever. And you carry this anxiety, right? And then later on in life, you might start smoking, right? You've got this oral fixation. Maybe you used to like suck on a binky or your thumb, right? And parents were like, stop sucking your thumb. Well, according to Freud, like you were traumatized by that. Something happened. So later on in life, you're going to start smoking, or you're going to eat a lot, or you're going to kiss a lot, or, all the stuff. So that's kind of where his stuff is a little bit, it makes sense, but then it doesn't make sense. And then sublimation, when you look at that, seeking knowledge, humor, wit, sarcasm, being a food or wine expert, just the example they give. And then if we look at the reaction formation example, your speech purist, food faddist, prohibitionist, dislike of milk, because of that oral stage. Again, take personality and you'll do a deep dive. I would love to sit here and do a deep dive, but I'm already 24 minutes into this and I don't even know how many slides I'm in, but probably not that many. All right. Now we are going to look at the psychodynamic critics and revisionists. So now we're looking at the other people that came in after Freud, and they were like, all right, we're going to like take some of what you said and then we're going to throw out all the like kooky stuff. Okay, so now we have his critics, right? So we have Karen Horney's sociocultural approach. So if you click on this link, it's going to take you to an explanation of her approach. Okay, so basically both sexes envy the attributes of the other. So according to Horney, she was like, listen here, Freud, women don't have penis envy. You guys have womb envy. I said it, womb, as in WOMB, right? So, like, you know, according to Freud, we have penis envy. So we can't just like go out to the bathroom, right? And, Miss Horney was like, well, you can't carry a baby. So you are jealous of us. Now, was she really acting like that? Probably not. I'm just trying to make it funny. But, anyways, so um, there's this need for security, not sex. That's the primary motivator, the need for security. She was like, okay, Freud, everything is about sex with you. It's not. It's about having security. So she had the flip kind of, you know, like take on this perspective, if you will. And then you have Carl Jung, so Jung, but Jung, his analytical theory. Now, him and Freud, you can do a lot of reading about him. He has some really good books. Carl Jung was such an innovator in this field. And there was a time when, that was his buddy. Him and Freud got down, they were friends. And then they just kind of drifted apart. But he had this idea of the collective unconscious and these archetypes. And then if words that are associated with, Jung is anima, animus, persona. All right. And then this is a little more about Carl Jung. But if you click on this link, it's going to discuss his theory. And again, if you take the class personality, you're going to do a deep dive into these theorists, especially Freud, and probably Carl Jung as well. And then we have Alfred Adler's individual psychology. So click on this link and you'll learn more about his perspective. So we're looking at perfection, not pleasure, as the key motivator. Compensation, social context. And then his really big one is the role of birth order and how birth order plays, plays into your personality. I did a lot when I was getting my undergrad degree. I had to do a paper in my research class. So I learned a lot about Alfred Adler because I did my paper on what I titled it the middle child syndrome, right? Because people would always be like, well, I was the middle child, so I didn't get this. And I was like the mediator. So I was really interested in that. So I did a paper on it. So I learned a lot about Alfred Adler. So again, click on any of these links and you're going to learn more about their perspectives. Why am I not going? Click. All right. All right, so evaluating psychodynamic perspectives. All right, contributions and shared principles. Importance of childhood experiences. Development proceeds in stages, right? Everything happens in stages. Individuals transform experiences, giving them meaning. And then the role of unconscious processes. So these are the things that are involved in psychodynamic perspectives. And then conflicts between inner and outer worlds. So when you're learning about psychodynamic, you're learning about all of these principles. Personality and adjustment are important topics of psychological study. All right. Now, what are the criticisms, the big old icks of Freud? All right, there was too much emphasis on early experiences. So Freud put everything on childhood experiences. If this happens in childhood, then boom, this is going to happen in adulthood. So you'll notice that a lot of times people will say they go back to their childhood. Everything goes back to their childhood. And although a lot of that is true, which is the reason they keep Freud around, it wasn't about so much the sex stuff of what he said. So what they've said is that people can change and adapt. So what happened to you in childhood is not fixed. It doesn't mean that this is going to stay the way it is because of anything that, could have happened or how you were brought up. Too much faith in unconscious mind's control of behavior. That's both Freud and Jung. So there was too much emphasis on looking at the unconscious mind and its control. There's more to it than just that. And then, of course, Freud, that's why it's not Jung, it's Freud. There was too much emphasis on sexuality. So everything, again, with Freud related to sex. Difficulty in empirical testing. Although empirical studies have now been done, Freud's theories way back when, there was no empirical testing, right? There's no like research methods on that. And that's the reason that Freud's stuff is like, we're throwing that kind of stuff out because there was no empirical testing, where there was on other theorists. All right, so now we shift into humanistic perspective. So now we're saying bye-bye, Freud. I mean, Freud's always going to stay around because so much of his theory is accurate. It's just all the wonky stuff that's out. So now we shift into humanistic, and you might have heard of the humanistic perspective psychologist. So they views that stress a person's capacity for personal growth and positive human qualities. So instead of looking at all the conflicts and what's wrong, they're looking at, okay, what's right? How are we growing? So it's quite opposite of psychodynamic. We all have the ability to control our lives and to achieve what we desire. So basically what it's saying is that the past does not define us. The past doesn't define our future. We are in control of that. We can change the course of our life. All right, so major theorist in the humanistic perspective is Abraham Maslow. And we'll go over, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But he is the guru of that. And the highest form on the pyramid is self-actualization, according to Maslow. Now, if you look at the pyramid now, they have another one above that called self-transcendence. Again, if you go and take this class in college, you'll learn more about that. Self-transcendence is like way beyond yourself. Those are people like that you strive to be, like Mother Teresa, Jesus, Gandhi, those type. That's transcendence. But according to Maslow, his highest up there was self-actualization. That's basically being, you are the person that you've achieved everything in life that you want for you. I'll go into it a little more. All right. Peak experiences. Maslow's examples of self-actualized individuals were limited and biased. So with anybody's theory, there's going to be some limitations. So for him, it was too limited. There wasn't a lot out there. It needs to be the theory needs to be grown because there's more, especially in today's world with social media and cell phones and technology and all of that stuff. His kind of perspective doesn't really fit today's world. You can kind of like look at it and say, okay, this makes sense, but there's more to it now. And you can add to the hierarchy. All right, then we have Carl Rogers. Now, this man here was considered to be the most beloved psychologist that ever lived. So, fun little fact. Carl Rogers, most beloved psychologist that ever lived. Now, extra credit time. I'm just pulling it out of my head here. If you could tell me who is the most beloved psychologist to live, send it to me in an email and say, if you're a student of mine, and let me know that Carl Rogers was the most beloved psychologist. Extra credit. All right. All right. So raw ingredients versus right conditions. This is all his thoughts. Personal growth and self-determination. Unconditional positive regard, conditions of worth, self-concept, empathy, genuineness. Oh, let me go back. I need to go back. All right. So I don't go through that too fast. So Carl Rogers, basically, because he was the most beloved psychologist, he could see anybody, right? And there is an interview that he did with case. Her name is Gloria. I thought I put it in here, but if I didn't, I'll put it in the still PowerPoint. Anyways, he was the type that could see any person, that every single person has worth and value, and you should show empathy towards them and genuineness and unconditional positive regard. Well, in the real natural world of psychologists and therapists and counselors, that's not exactly true. There's not, meaning that there are therapists like me as a therapist. I'm not going to see everybody, right? Because everybody has biases. Everybody has, like there are certain clients that I won't see, right? Um, People that hurt children, right? Anything like that. Now, I won't. And there are other counselors and therapists that I know that won't, but then there are others that do. That's what makes the field the way it is. So, and there's different specialties. But in truth, is everybody has biases towards something, right? It's bias is very different than other words. And so Carl Rogers, he just could see anybody, right? And he just had this raw, genuine whatever. And it's a good thing, but it's also it was not. So his theory, now I talk about this in my counseling class, right? And a lot of people love his theory of, that unconditional positive regard, client-centered therapy. That was his therapy, client-centered therapy. He developed that. And that basically was you put the control in the client, and it's not about asking them questions, or it's more of just letting them figure it out. And most therapists were not like that. We have to dig, we have to ask, so you can look a lot of his like there's a lot of videos, a lot of archive stuff on him counseling, and it's really interesting. But most of us, we start off with client centered, right? Getting to know your client, getting to know their story, and then you segue into what works for the client. All right, so let's talk about, I know the big old X there. All right, so we're going to talk about what his contributions and criticisms were. So, contributions of his work: self perception is key to personality, positive approach to the whole person. I emphasize that because that is the reason a lot of people, like his client centered therapy, was because of that positive approach to the totality of the person. And then emphasizing the conscious experience. So, unlike Freud, that emphasizes unconscious, he emphasized the conscious, what's in awareness. Okay, so criticisms of his approach: too optimistic about human nature. So he was basically, feel good, do gooder, that's not a bad thing, but sometimes clients come in with really deep issues. And so he was too optimistic. Sometimes you have to sit with the dirty. You have to sit with what hurts. And so he wouldn't have been your dude, because you gotta sometimes dig in the trenches. So that was kind of like a downsize of, or downgrade, or down, a criticism, whatever, of Rogers. And then overestimate freedom and rationality. So again, if you look at his, and I'll put that in the still PowerPoint. If you look at his like archive of videos and stuff, you will see what I'm talking about. And I will also, there is raw footage of Sigmund Freud where there's only a small clip of Freud's actual voice. There's only one out there that's like that. So I will include that as well. Can't believe I didn't do that. All right, move on. Promote self-love, narcissism. So because he was, he was not narcissistic, not saying that, but because of that self-love, that overindulgence of self, it was narcissist. So that was kind of a criticism of that. And then also people not held accountable. Again, that goes with that unconditional positive regard. It's like, No matter what you did, it's okay. It's okay. Everything's gonna be wonderful. So there's no accountability. So again, I love the client-centered or person-centered approach that he developed. I think it's great when you're first, like when I'm first doing therapy and I'm meeting a client and, allowing them to be comfortable in what they're talking about. But then I change my approach because then you have to, help your client grow. So again, good stuff, but then, you got to veer away from some of the stuff. All right, let's talk about trait perspectives. Personality consists of broad, enduring dispositions or traits that tend to lead to characteristic responses. Traits are stable characteristics and are the building blocks of personality. So now we'll talk about some trait theories, which these are all very interesting. People can be described by their typical behavior, according to trait theorists. Strong versus weak tendencies. Now, I'm going to click through this really quick. All right, so one of them, okay, so we've got a theorist, Gordon Allport. Each person unique in capacity to adapt, right? This was his belief that each person, had this uniqueness within themselves, to be able to adapt to things. Personality is understood through traits. Behavior is consistent across situations. The lexical approach, 4,500 traits. So you can look more into that into the book. I'm not going to deep dive into this one. There is so now we have this 5-factor model of personality. Now I know a lot of you have probably taken that personality inventory, and I administer one as well in my class. So this is called, now it wasn't in order, so to make it easy to remember, they took it a little bit out of order and then they called it Ocean, so that you could remember what each one stood for. So if you are interested and you want to take the free, because a lot of them you have to pay for. So I know where the freebies are. So you can click on this free 5-factor, say that fast, free 5-factor personality test. All right, so now we're going to kind of discuss what the 5-factor model is. So O, the ocean, openness to experience. So how open are you? So on the one side, you're imaginative, right? So if you take this personality inventory, it's going to go through that where you fall into. So if you fall into one end, you're imaginative, like creative in your mind and all that, or are you more practical? Variety, there's a variety in your life. You're a very, when it comes to your personality, variety is the spice of life. Like, do you feel like that? Or are you more of a routine person? And then independent. Are you more independent, or do you shift more towards like conforming to, people, rules, laws, whatever? All right. Then the C in the ocean is conscientiousness. So then again, we have the yin to the yang, right? The yin to the yang. So are you organized, or are you more disorganized? And that doesn't just mean like, is your desk messy, your house? It's also like the clutter in your mind as well. If you're, if your space is cluttered, usually your mind is cluttered. So, and these are things you can actually work on and work through and go from being disorganized to organized. So again, personality is enduring, but it does shift. And, depending on what your environment is, it can go from one thing to another. So again, it's not fixed. All right, careful or careless. Do you tend to be more on the careful side or more on the careless side? Could be a mix of both. Are you disciplined or impulsive? Now, when we look at extroversion, right? Are you like me? Even though I'm an extrovert, it does not mean that I'm happy about it. It doesn't mean that it's taxing, right? A lot of extroverts are like, God, I wish I was an introvert. And a lot of introverts are like, gosh, I wish I was an extrovert. And we shouldn't do that. We don't need to do that. If you do it correctly, you embrace your personality type and you're able to like balance things. And I can go into that, but I usually go into that in my counseling class. Anyways, all right, so extroversion. Are you more sociable or retiring, right? I know that sounds like weird, but retiring. Are you more like kind of recluse? Are you more not isolated, but just kind of reserved? That's a better word. Are you more fun loving or are you more somber? Are you more affectionate or are you more reserved? All right, now we look at agreeableness. Are you more soft hearted or ruthless? Trusting or suspicious? Helpful or uncooperative? It's a really cool test to take because then you really see where you lie. All right, when we look at neuroticism and stability, are you more anxious, calm, insecure, or secure? Self pitying or self satisfying? Or self satisfied, sorry. So it looks at different scales on what your neuroticism is. And we all have a bit of neuroticism, but it's just, okay, where do we fall on that spectrum? So you can pause this and you can look at all of the different kind of breakdowns in this 5-factor model of personality. So I'm going to move on. All right, so, this is in the book put in. So, do the big 5 show up in the assessment of personality in cultures around the world? Do the big 5 personality traits show up in animals? It's kind of interesting. All right, so when we look at neuroticism, extroversion, and well being, life events explain little about a person's overall happiness, well being. High extroversion plus low neuroticism related to higher level of well being. Now, you'll get this if and when you take that assessment, if you want to do that on your own. Subjective well being, a person's assessment of own positive affect relative to negative affect and evaluation of own life in general. And then traits. So, what are traits? If you ask yourself, well, what is a trait? What is a trait? I don't understand. A trait are enduring characteristics. So, these are characteristics that you have that are enduring through time. And, they used to say that, oh, it was fixed. Like how you were at 5 years old is how you're going to be. And when we look at temperament, right? If you were like a really fussy child or if you're just a really calm child, then normally your temperament stays the same. Doesn't mean it can't change, but temperament usually is pretty consistent. But traits, they're enduring. And then states. So you've got states and traits, right? States are briefer, temporary experiences. So, going through something and you're uncharacteristically like not you, right? That might be just a state. So it can get confused with traits, but really it's just a state. So brief, temporary experiences. All right, so evaluating trait perspectives, contributions of studying personality traits allows us to know people better, enriches understanding of connections among personality and health, ways of thinking, career success, and interpersonal relationships. And then the criticisms of the trait perspective, it ignores the role of the situation in behavior because, again, sometimes it's the situation, not necessarily, your trait. Ignores nuances of an individual's personality. All right, now we're going to look at these social cognitive perspectives. So emphasis is on conscious awareness. Again, this is conscious as well. Beliefs, expectations, and goals. Incorporates principles from behaviorism. Now, if you remember what behaviorism is from way back when, chapter 1, behaviorism is what I can see, right? I have to see this behavior. So it incorporates some behavioristic principles. Explore people's ability to reason, to think about the past, present, and future, and then reflect on the self. How behavior is uniquely tailored to diverse situations. All right, so our leading theorist in the social cognitive perspective is this dude right here, Albert Bandura. And if you took ACE psychology, then I am sure you learned about Albert Bandura and his Bobo doll experience. So this is the original video of the Bobo doll experiment. Super cool. Definitely listen to it. It's It's very interesting. So click on this link, and this is a crash. Oh, I'm sorry. This link is the crash course to the Bobo Beatdown. So they do a snapshot of the theory. This is the actual Bobo doll experiment. So if you click on this link, you'll hear him talking, black and white. Starts off black and white, it's a little grainy, then you could see some color, but this is the actual raw footage of that experiment. All right, so key processes and variables. So he's kind of that founder of the observational learning. So basically kind of that monkey see, monkey do. So you learn through observation. So what you do, like what you see is what you do. It's just like when you see this really funny, I mean, they are funny no matter what. I see a lot of funny videos of like the little kids, like toddlers, 2 years old, 3 years old, and they cuss, they say bad words, and their parents get them on camera. Well, that's kind of looking at that social cognitive perspective. They heard it from somewhere, right? So they kind of mimic what their parents do. Um, Another key process is personal control, having that ability to kind of looking at self-efficacy, and then reciprocal determinism, which is behavior, environment, and cognitive factors interact to create personality. So it's not just this one thing or this other thing. It's this, there are all of these things that are responsible for personality, right? For those concepts. So behavior, environment, and thinking. All right, so this is just kind of like a snapshot, a look at what reciprocal determinism looks like. All right, some more fun videos here for you. All right, this is really cute. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. This is the marshmallow test. And I could have, oh, I did that in the still PowerPoint. Okay, so in the still PowerPoint, it's gonna look a little bit different. It'll say click to watch, I think, the marshmallow test. So if you click on this picture, it's gonna take you to Walter Mischel's experiment on this perspective. So there's situationism. Behavior and personality vary considerably across contexts, not whether personality predicts behavior, but when and how it does. Delay of gratification studies, putting off a pleasurable experience in interest of some larger but later reward. And then there's the CAPS model of personality, stability over time rather than across situations. And then coherence, interconnections among cognitions and emotions affect our behavior. If you want to click to watch this, this is the SciShow Psych. I love this as well. How the famous marshmallow test got willpower wrong. So this is a good video too. Anytime I stick a video in there, it's because I feel like it really relates and it adds to the chapter and makes it more interesting to learn. It's not in your textbook, these things. That's why I like to bring it to life. So, you have a little fun with it. All right, so of course we're gonna have a big old X, right? For some of his, criticism. So contributions, let's start off with the good stuff. I always like to start off with the good stuff. Highlights observation of behavior. So like I observe, I learn, I do, right? Emphasizes the influence of cognitive processes, so thinking, suggests people can control their environment. And then of course criticisms, this theory is too concerned with change of the situation or with the situation. Very specific predictions hinder generalization. So it's very specific. So I see, I do, whatever, and it kind of doesn't look at like generalizing factors of situations. And then, of course, it ignores the role of biology. So it doesn't even look at genetic components. So that's kind of a big criticism of this approach. Is it still a good theory? Absolutely. It's a great theory and it's accurate. But of course, every single theory, if it wasn't a good theory, then it wouldn't have criticism. So everything, and the reason that there are new theories are because of the criticisms of other theories. And we just we grow, we build, and we keep the collection of all these theories because they matter. All right, now when we look at the biological perspectives, personality and the brain. Brain damage alters personality. So that's the reason the brain is in every chapter. It's important. If something happens to your brain, an accident, anything like that, that absolutely can change your personality. And if I didn't do it in here, I definitely saved it. So absolutely, when you check out the still PowerPoint, there's probably going to be more clips in there of case studies. All right, so brain activity correlates with personality. This is Eysenck's reticular activation system theory. So this is the wheel, okay? And so if you look at it, you've got your introverted and your extroverted, right? You've got you've got your too much, so it's kind of in the negative. So top left, introversion kind of negative, and then you've got your introversion kind of like, I don't want to say normal, but like more stable, right? And then at the bottom, when we're looking at emotional stability and stability, so at the bottom, emotional stability of the introvert, that's what's in the bottom green. And then to the right for extrovert, that's in the bottom right. So you can just pause that and take a look at that. So extroverts and introverts have different baseline levels of arousal. So what arouses the extrovert is going to be different than the introvert. It doesn't, one is not better over the other. You are who you are. Your neurotransmitters, your chemicals in the brain, that is just, it's who you are. So different arousal levels for different people. Findings related to blood flow and dopamine levels. All right, so this just kind of looks at introversion versus extroversion and personality characteristics, level of arousal, and typical activities. So you can look at that. All right, here's just another one, the biological perspective, Gray's reinforcement sensitivity theory. So you can pause and look at this. All right, so when we look at neuroticism, like if someone says like, you're so neurotic. All right, so neuroticism has been linked to more persistent activation in the amygdala in response to aversive or disturbing stimuli, low levels of circulating serotonin, poor regulation of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and then dopamine and serotonin openness to experience. Neural connections involved in thinking about other people, along with oxytocin and serotonin, is linked to that agreeableness. So in this little, snippet here, we're looking at what neuroticism is linked to. And then greater brain volume in areas involving attention, impulses, and planning, which is that conscientiousness of that big factor 5. All right, a lot of stuff when we look at biological perspectives, the biggest thing they do is twin studies. Twin studies are like huge. I'm gonna skip over this. That's just the takeaway for that. All right, so when we look at personality assessments, self-report, again, it's going to have positive, negative. Beware social desirability, presenting in a favorable light, leading to socially acceptable answers rather than being truthful. So when you take these personality assessments, are you being truthful? Or, that could lead to skewed data because you're not being truthful. Empirically keyed tests used to get around social desirability problem. Test takers do not know what is being measured. So people do that, they'll give a test and they tell you it's measuring this, but really it's measuring that. And they do that because they want to get a true depiction. Test items not related to purpose of the test, like I said. MMPI is an example. That is an extreme huge test. It's 567 questions. It's used in court cases, divorce cases. It is probably the most accurate assessment of personality. All right. So click on this link right here. It'll take you to the MMPI and, discussing that. Looking at neuroticism, extroversion, openness, personality inventory 3. All right. I'm going to top out at this really soon. Oh, let me go back really quick. So if you want to learn more, click on this Rorschach ink blot test. Those are those ink blots. They have them in black and white and in color. These are other projective tests. This is the thematic apperception test. So again, click on that if you want to learn more about that. This is just some other methods and I'm done because I bought them out at 1 hour. So I wanted to like keep that done. So even though I kind of ran through those last ones really quick, go back to those, the Rorschach, especially that one. It's really interesting. I'm sure you've seen them before, but they're really cool. So click on all those links and really learn about personality because it's such a cool and interesting topic. So I hope you learned a lot. I hope you really enjoyed this chapter. And if you did, take a semester in this because it is amazing. All right. Until our next chapter, I will see you. So have a great evening, weekend, or wherever you're at in the world. All right. Peace.